If folks don't mind finding a seat, there's plenty of seats up front, seats over there. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fine Arts Work Center. I am Terry Kehoe. I'm the Fellowship Director here at the Work Center. Tonight, we are thrilled to present the second Fellows Showcase of the 2024-2025 Fellowship Year, an evening of art, fiction, and poetry by 4 of our current fellows. I hope you've had a chance to enjoy some refreshments, food, and check out the wonderful exhibition in the gallery. Opening tonight and on display in the Hudson D. Walker Gallery through March 16th are the exhibitions Tongued Rough, The Way We Press the Body by Ed Raven, and the exhibition Verbalist by Cherry Yu. Ed and Cherry, if you're here and you feel comfortable, would you please stand so we can recognize you and give you a huge round of applause. Amazing show. Congratulations, both of you. This evening, we also have readings by fiction fellow Jason Ferris and poetry fellow Lucas Martínez, who will be reading in that order and welcomed to the stage by a peer they've asked to introduce them. After the 2 readings, we welcome you to hang out, grab refreshments, visit the shows in the gallery, and hang out with us until around 8 p.m. Before we begin, I just want to send some gratitude to our supporters who helped make this evening possible. Thank you to the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod, Mass Cultural Council, Mass Development, Provincetown Tourism Fund, and the Provincetown Cultural Council for supporting FOC, Fellow Fridays, and the arts. And also a huge shout out to my colleagues out there who helped make this place a great place to work and help make this event possible. Thank you, colleagues. I'd now like to welcome second-year fellow Kevin Fitchett to the stage, who will introduce our first reader.
Thank you, Terry. Jason. There are few fellows bold enough to enter the lounge here on Pearl and traverse the blue carpeting to the computer where I'm in blackout writing focus, the floor lamp burning over my shoulder, the Macintosh pumping live at El Macumbo into my headphones, my back broadly facing the room in censure, in my don't dare even glance at me gait. Few fellows brave enough to inch toward my cold keyboard spitfire and give my hunch a firm, spell-breaking tap. A self-assured, gentlemanly tap. Jason Ferris is the only fellow who's done it. The tap, his leather-wrapped form looming over me when I turn with foreboding, his waxed ginger coif, his matching eyebrows jinked, every cologne fiber of him gone vulpine still, his sunscreened face breathing on mine in the Macintosh glow. And though Jason has broken my novel drafting spell, and I turn in my chair in towering judgment, he casts an enviable spell over me. He's built of mirth and Provincetown Jim Bowflex biomass, of Maryland intercoastal pragmatism, and grips to the belief that something powerful lies dormant inside of us by way of the queer story, which is also the superhero story. He's always ready to help anyone, and easily manages to break the ice when communicating with new people, as Jason's partner, Georgi, says. That tap This week, I've sat at my command center in the lounge reading Jason's fiction with my decoy headphones playing no music at all. And each time I've come across a line where all at once, in truth, the thump of Ferris's art has broken my ice. As I've come to learn, Jason's fiction has fidelity to how he describes the short stories he admires, those with an urgency that feel like you're tossing something hot in the air and trying not to burn your hands. Jason's faith lies in moments when something is lost, when something is taken from us. To quote a passage from Garth Greenwell, which Jason underlined in blue felt-tip pen, Jason's fiction, most importantly to me, has an authority. Again and again, it wakes me with sage insistence, along with the whiff of the metaphysical. As via his opening line of An Effort of Opposites, beautiful title, "Let me teach you," he said, "my name, spelled roughly the same in your language, but pronounced differently." And when you've read 103 38-page submissions from talented anonymous writers, as I have this week, as a juror, Thierry knows, for next year's Fiction Fellows here at FALC, 103 38-page submissions, you fiend for an opening salvo that nourishing, that cocksure, where the writer presents themselves instantly as one you can trust will elect what's elemental to lived life. Picking up Jason's stories as I prep for this introduction in the midst of 407 anonymous applications. It's impossible to become a fellow here, yeah. It was like quenching a thirst for salt, a thirst I didn't know needed to be slaked, until the grain of Jason was dissolving on my tongue. Very sexy stories. Very sexy stories. Ferris's work has won the 2021 Eric Kirkland Memorial Award, been nominated for the Penn Robert J. Dau Short Story Prize, been supported by the Iowa Writers Workshop, the Truman Capote Fellowship, the Kenyon Review's Peter Tyler Fellowship, and Best for Us, the Fine Arts Work Center. And quickly, I'd be remiss not to mention now that Jason and I just today went for a cola and a brewski, our respective weaknesses, at lunch hour at Squealing Pig today, where I crowded beside him to gather intel with Jason in the flesh, as with Jason's fiction as his living agent. You're in the company of half-secrets, of earnest raps of the spirit, which is always good company. Jason is good company. And then from across the glossy bar appeared inevitably, this is true, the turbulence of kismet I've come to associate with both Jason and his art. They're at the Pig 5 hours ago, with the PGA golf tournament playing on the flat screen Sony. A commotion broke out down the establishment. And for the first time in my life, I was a civilian in a bar in which a stranger had bought the house a round of drinks. And the tall feller with a Bruins cap and drag bingo slated for the night was raising his honey-colored beer in the afternoon light, listing a bit as he recited an Irish sea chanty, Jason. I found it. There are good ships and wood ships that sail the sea, but the best ships are friendships, and may they always be. And this chummy ephemera, the moment when a feather reaches out across the pub and touches the soul, I treasure it. It's my animus for art, and there are a few young writers, Jason's young, whom I trust to someday limn such a windfall and to, as Jason would say, express things in life not easily expressed. So let's lift our glasses to him. Jason, this round's on you.
Wow, Kevin. That, I had written a little opening blurb where I thanked you for your introduction, and I said that it was immensely funny, and I was apparently correct in my prophecy. So that got me in the right mood, Kevin. Thank you. So thank you first, Kevin, for that abundantly kind and funny introduction, as I have scripted here. Thank you also to the Fine Arts Work Center for the gift of time and to Provincetown for the gift of community. I am immeasurably happy to be with you all tonight. What you're about to hear is an unpublished episode from the book I've been writing for the past few years. This episode is titled An Effort of Opposites. You don't need to know anything beforehand. I hate people do that. Here's what you need to know. I'm not doing that. An Effort of Opposites. Let me teach you, he said, my name, spelled roughly the same in your language, but pronounced differently. This was our first date, which had begun on a dance floor. Right when I walked in, he took my hand and said, "Who are you? I must know." And so it was no surprise that we ended up at his place, but quite surprising that, stripped down to our underwear and wrapped in his duvet, he was chilly and yawny. I wasn't sure whether we were to kiss or cuddle or fuck. We hadn't met on Grindr. We had no rule book. I ruffled his hair, waiting for direction while uttering his name, Christian, with that Slavic R that sounds a little like an L. It closed a distance between us, no longer foreigners to each other. "What's your name?" he then joked, even though I'd many times that night given it to him, whispering it against his ear and the cold loop of metal hooked through it. He liked silliness. He liked playfulness. I liked how easily he accessed parts of himself that eluded me. Christian, I said, metabolizing his name. Opening his profile now, 2 years later and 2 weeks since we broke up, I find that he's requested no names, not even a face, just a big cock and a good pounding, written in clear grammatical English. His was always good, but he swore up and down that summers in the U.S. were not enough of an education in English, especially as far as pronunciation went. He wasn't ashamed of his accent, but asked often how I flattened my vowels, at the front of the mouth, I'd say, not the back of the throat, and how I made sounds unfound in Bulgarian, especially the TH sound, which he hammered into what struck me instead like noises of affirmation. The apple, the horizon, the painting. I'm not sure whether long distance or allowing each other to hunt on Grindr finally overextended the cord between us. "Don't we want to belong to each other?" I once said. "We do," he said, "we do. Sex is not belonging. Sex is animal. Guy I meet last week, he is not lovely like you." And so Christian and I often bumped into each other on Grindr, asking each other whose attention we'd won, even if we were sharing the same room. I liked that he delivered all his verbs in the present tense, as if all his experiences occupied the same moment. I also liked his alignment toward sex. We needed it in the same way we needed a hug. We needed the release, and not just of the muscles when they produce a well-earned orgasm, of responsibility, the abdication of self that happens when you give your needs over to another person, even if only unburdening you for the 30 minutes between entering someone's messy apartment and leaving it. I can't imagine what it would be like to hook up with him now, without any care or sweetness, which he offered best and in abundance. And so, after hovering over the selection of letters on my phone, and considering that he might not like to hear from me, that his desire for anonymity might be a symptom of heartbrokenness, I write, "Hey," which in Grindr speak means, "I like you, I'm interested if you are, I'm horny." "We're both thinking the same thing," he replies, almost immediately. He's in Scotland now, where it's afternoon, where men are at this hour feeling the first aches for company. "Somehow I doubt that," I write. "Everyone here wants the same thing." "Well, I did come on to see if anyone here was gay, and I guess if I got a yes, we know what would happen." "Confident," he says. "You know what I mean." "I'm joking," he says, which he was always having to say to me when we were together. "You're so trusting," he once told me, and I replied, "What reason would I have to distrust you?" "Where are you?" he writes. "The golf course." "Your father does not want you going there anymore, yes?" "He's not going anymore," I correct. Weeks ago, my father lost the auction for the Breton Bay Golf and Country Club, where he worked longer than I've been alive. Devastated, not that he'd show it, he picked up and moved down to North Carolina to start a new life. He said he'd never go back to those unappreciative fucks. Today is the tournament, the 45th anniversary of the Southern Maryland Amateur, which my father and grandfather started together. I'm here to check if anything has fundamentally changed since the transfer of ownership. I've settled at a corner of the bar, too far away for the bartender, the only other person here right now, to see I'm scrolling through Grindr. Here in Southern Maryland, the app is mostly vacant, ghosts of profiles, silhouettes with sparing stats, height, weight, pleasures, all of them sexual. When I used to come here, all drinks were served by a woman named Mary Lou. She worked 7 days a week. She worked doggedly and made it everyone's business that she did so. Perhaps she feared some younger thing would usurp her position, not just as sole bartender, but as town gossip. A living public square, no information passed by Mary Lou, who, when I entered adulthood, shortened her name to Lou, the androgynous second half of her name. I could never tell if she did this to advertise herself as one of the guys, to ease out of them the sociability men show other men, open, joking, unapologizing, or to release herself from the trappings of gender. She wore from then on a touch of queerness that endeared her to me. If she were here and I had Christian with me, she'd have a drink waiting on the table before I ever sat down. Then she'd ask what my friend was having, using this word, friend, with kind skepticism. She'd understand it should be me who introduces him as my boyfriend. She'd ease the admission out of us, first with conversation about her life. The sun pickled her a little more each day, she'd say, even more rapidly with the sunlight the new owners installed right above her office. She called the bar her office. She'd hold out her leathered skin and flash her ruby nails. Christian would probably take her hand and trace the striations of her veins. He'd tell her something disarming, perhaps that she was a lady of distinguishment, or that she had the same hands as his mother, who he missed terribly in spite of the tensions between them. I'd ask Lou what she thought of the new owners, and she'd say the place had gotten stuffy, and it has. The well-loved carpet has been exchanged for loud hardwood, the back of the bar wears a sheet of new subway tile, and the spindled granny chairs have been swapped out for tufted cushions on metal legs. My father took pride in the approachability of the bar, in its rustic accommodations. He presided over the room like a great blue heron, visiting each and every patron and ensuring they were treating the girls, this is what he called the servers, with the utmost kindness. I tell Christian with interludes from Lou about summers before computerization, when I helped my father and grandfather collect scorecards and, by hand, check player handicaps and sort them into flights. I even helped to charm local business owners into buying sponsorships. Lou would go on, after a few drinks had unwound us, to tease us about our relationship without calling it that. "You two are such good friends," she'd press. "You're so happy, you're so close." She knew how to jab holes in your image until she could see what you were hiding. I remember telling her I was gay. "Honey," she said, "you've been trying to beat down that beast since you were a kid." She'd then draw out our anxieties. Christian and I both fear, more than we have any right to, that we might catch a disease. In childhood, we both had congenital hernias, gentle loops of intestine that had dropped into our scrotums along with our testicles. Although surgically corrected, neither of us have been able to shake the feeling that something else inside us is malfunctioning. 8 unnecessary testicular ultrasounds, 16 unwarranted STI tests, and 3 courses of post-exposure PEP have accumulated between the two of us. When we first discovered this, on one of our nights together in bed, where we could not stop kissing, we were gnawing at something, a thing greater than lust, love sickness, or language. He said, "Oh my God, are we soulmates?" He smiled widely, giddily, and said, "Isn't it crazy how we meet?" Because it was. How rare to meet outside of Grindr, and how rare to meet another guy who not only monitored his health, but worried it, like a scab, all the time. He said, "We are the same, but also different." He kissed me. Lou would learn this all. "So," I write from my corner of the bar, "you're looking for a good pounding?" "Yes," Christian writes, "and you don't care from whom." "Sex is sex," he writes. "What happened to your fear?" "If I get anything, I take drugs." "What if the companies producing those drugs shut down? What if a meteor hits us in the face? What if war happens?" he says. "You never felt this way before," I say. "I change," he writes, sounding just as unkind as the things he wants done to him, things I admittedly want done to me too. In our first week together, we saw each other every night for both conversation and sex. We said we were both verse. We topped each other, although I think he preferred to receive, given how he'd pretend struggle to break inside of me, then roll onto his belly so I could pleasure him. Sometimes in the middle of the animal act, we drop on top of one another, spent. Orgasm had been eschewed as goal or conclusion. The end did not even come when I retreated to my own bed, sniffing on my clothes the scent of his bubblegum vape, horrible habit he called it, and his sweat. I toss my phone across my table. The new bartender, a man, asks if I'd like another beer. I nod. He nods. He's given me a wide berth since I entered the bar, which surprised me at first. Historically, I've been immediately recognized here. It has, however, been a few years since I visited, and even longer since I competed in the tournament. The first flight of players will soon flood the bar with spilled drinks and tales of each other's gallantry. My third beer of the morning arrives. The bartender nods again. He's an older man and has an older man's aversion to me. He can sense, I think, that I'm gay, and probably that I'm girlishly heartbroken over Christian and his flaunted new flings. I sip my beer, which coats my throat. My mother calls it liquid bread. My mother liked Christian. She told him he had wonderful hair, and he said, "Most Bulgarians are like this, blonde and blue eyes." My mother doesn't know yet that we've separated. I don't want her to know I failed. She'd say something saccharine. "You'll find someone else. Maybe this will give you a chance to reevaluate yourself," which would, so sweetly that I couldn't say a word in defiance, strike me as a judgment. She'd think my boyfriend was a fluke and that I was ready now for a serious life with a wife and kids. I know she doesn't really believe this. She'd never asked me to change, and yet I'm sure at the center of her upbringing is a picture of a traditional son with traditional children and traditional grandchildren. It pains me that I can't give her what she wants, and maybe this is why every word from her seems to rattle with disappointment. My mother would be disappointed in the bartender, at least, for leaving me to my own devices, even if I've cloistered myself across the room under an embankment of windows. The bartender is busy hosing beer from fresh kegs into taps. I grab my phone, which receives a new glare, a new harshness, and march onto the balcony so I can call Christian, who picks up immediately. "You never call without a purpose," he says. "Has anyone taken you up on your offer yet?" "Just one," he says. A silence sits between us until he sighs. He can never keep quiet for long, and says, "An older man. He took me for tea first. These Scotsmen, they love their tea. I know it is a cliche, but they do. Same as British, but they don't like to be called that. They complain all the time that they only voted to remain part of the UK for access to the EU. Then Brexit happens, and they still don't have their freedom. This guy, he tells me secession can never happen now. Too many English have bought up Scottish countryside, and they won't vote to separate from their homeland. I don't think they should separate, like Macedonia and Bulgaria. Macedonia leaves Bulgaria, and now so many Macedonians become Bulgarian citizens for Bulgarian passports. The guy, I'm sure, does not want to hear this, so instead we finish our tea and talk about other things. We have a really good conversation, and he asks to go for a walk. I have a good idea why he wants to. When we land at his apartment, he lives in a little tenement at the end of a quiet street, a little murdery. He asks if I want to come up. I do. He puts on a fresh pot of tea, then comes close to me. He smells like shaving cream, and says I am very beautiful, that he doesn't usually go for Americans, which is interesting. He does not identify me as Bulgarian. I guess my accent has changed since moving here. So I kiss him. We're fumbling around. He likes my earring, and he tells me his first guy had an earring too, and you know the power of firsts. He's hard. I can feel the shape of it, huge, and I'm hard. I drop to my knees, and just when I want to ask if he's DDF, if he's been tested lately, I take him in my mouth, and I just think about that story of his first guy with the earring. So detailed, but I can't remember it all right now, and I can get off. And anyway, healthcare is free here. I'll get tested next month, and I'll take care of whatever happens. I'm hard, hatefully so. Not just because Christian has excited me, but because I love the sound of his stories and his voice, which, maybe owing to his accent, for me, still Bulgarian, vibrates at a different frequency than other voices I've heard. Christian was accepted into art schools with big names and big price tags, but did not have the funds to attend, landing him at the same college as me and one of its only local party venues. His voice wears these acceptances along with a poetical bend toward art. Everything is art, he'd say in our art classes. My favorite of his paintings was titled Disease. It displayed an opened-mouthed creature with a broad, branching tongue lined with pills. We collaborated once. I'd had an inspiring dream nestled up beside Christian one night. We were boys in my dream, maybe 8, running hand in hand along the gulping shore. It needled our bare feet with rocks and crabs and other stray things. We suddenly came upon a very tall hill. Christian told me to climb. As we scaled it, I discovered we were ascending to my family's golf course. Knees squealing, ankles burning rubber, we fought to the top of that hill until we could look out onto the unattended greens. We smiled at them, temporary lords of this place. We made a game of running from one green to the next and plunging our fingers into the plastic cups at their centers. The sky bent with reds and oranges, blues and greens of a supernatural variety. Christian spotted a mother duck walking her ducklings. We snuck our arms under the mother's smooth bottom. When we lifted, she didn't budge, not against our twiggy arms. She flapped her flightless wings and kicked her rubbery feet at our faces. One of her kicks sent Christian into a pond. Skin to surface, the water glowed, foamed, and reproduced him a full-grown man, even more than a man with the muscle he had, enough to lift a car, even the house where it was parked. On a single water-dipped toe, he balanced, admiring his new body. I splashed into the water too, my ears howling against the green murk. When I reached the surface, I was no different than when I dove in. Christian glided toward me, took my hand, gathered me in his sun-white heft, and lifted us above the water, the trees, the mountains I could now see were only hills and the clouds. He kissed me, smiled, and rubbed my belly. It bulged. I was pregnant. I had inside me the kind of boy I'd been seeing everywhere at that time, ladled with dimples and the smiles kids give you before they know not to. Wait, Christian said the morning after the dream. Are you adult when you get pregnant? It's a dream, I said. It's a story, he said, slipping out of bed and fetching each of us a notebook. What, I'm a writer? You read comic books and you don't know what to do now? I just like them, I said. Doesn't mean I understand them. What do you like about them, he asked. I don't know. Jean Grey witnesses her best friend being struck down by a car. Scott Summers drops out of a plane without a parachute. Aurora Monroe nearly overheats in a desert. When each is at their lowest, their powers emerge. And their kids when it happens, all of them. And they're rewarded for their suffering with powers that lead to more suffering, but also new community. It's the queer story, I guess, I said, never before having given this feeling language. So what should our hero's powers be, Christian said, segmenting the first sheet of his notebook into 6 evenly sized panels. I sketched in my notebook a double helix, then a zoomed-out shot of the cells surrounding it, then the hero's body, spread eagle and labeled with specks. Channeled through his hands and lips was the power to manipulate cells in another body. He could plant cancer, force rapid cell division to close a wound, even reprogram an arm into a leg, a liver into a kidney. Christian looked over my work and said, so that's how he can make a womb out of nothing. Scientists are already working on converting eggs into sperm, I said. Won't be long until a man can get a uterus transplant and carry an embryo made from 2 sets of sperm. You dream of carrying, he said. Maybe. You literally did last night, he said, amused. What about you, I asked. My mother, she always wants grandkids, he said, tapping his pencil against his notebook. We both, I think, grew up too gay to ever consider it a real possibility. When we were kids, I did not think I'd ever be able to get married, and now that I can, it's hard to know if I want to. I think this is true of many of us gay boys set loose on the world without any real example. The bar windows tremor. I look back. Inside the club are warrens of men knocking shoulders and clinking beers. Sometime during my conversation with Christian, the room transformed. I have to go, I say. I'm not going by Christian anymore, he said. I'm using Sipos, he says, which is the surname of his estranged father. I'm going to fashion it into something, he says. What, like a prison shiv? He laughs. Exactly, he says. But I like your name. Christian, I repeat, remembering how, when I first uttered it, he said, oh my God, great, 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 you're Bulgarian, how? He even quizzed me on names of Bulgarian towns his other American friends struggled to pronounce. Are you sure you're American, he had said. Everyone is named Christian, Christian says. Not like you are, I say, finally feeling the blanketing weight of my beers. Lubov, he says, using an artifact of affection from our relationship. I'm still me. No, I don't think you are, I say, ending the call and wobbling into the bar. Every year, a little twink competes in the tournament. Crash, he's called. Crash plays a nearly perfect game, boozes himself out of a trophy, and picks a fight with the biggest man he can find before a public, eponymous Crash. Crash is young, delightfully frumpy. I could tell he ate with abandon, and absolutely gorgeous. There was a moment a few years ago when he darted a hand at the breast of a mountainous man. The mountainous man looked down, swung Crash around, and pinioned the young man against his ample chest. Crash's eyes drooped, and he smiled, dizzily, trustingly as his legs slackened. The mountainous man lowered Crash to the ground and laid him on his back. I wondered if this was the moment Crash had searched for each year, that helium bliss at trusting the strongest man in the room to look after him, to show him care. Crash flashes across my mind as I throw my own punch at the largest man I can find, over 6 feet tall and wide enough to bulldoze a bulldozer. In my mind's eye, I equip him with metal plating and the big mouth of a grapple bucket, serrated and ready to chomp flesh and stone. When my knuckles, twisted at the moment of impact, thumb safely outside, just the way my father taught me, collide with Dozer's jaw, I imagine some of his plating chipping off. In reality, Dozer loses nothing except his cool. He socks me. The impact feels like it strikes my cheek multiple times over, especially when I realize I've landed on my back. The arms of 2 men lift me to my feet. 2 other guys restrain Dozer, who postures at me, rolling his shoulders, but venomless, his face is placid. We're playing a game of violence. Men like this game, maybe even the pretense of it, I judge, from how tenderly the 2 guys posted at my shoulders grasp my arms. We're kind to allow each other these releases. Much as I like to think of myself as something beyond man, a burst of warmth winds around us men. Dozer shakes his head, a soft chiding of me, and shrugs off the 2 guys deployed to his arms. Without a word, our contact terminates. I wonder how Sipos, would feel about Dozer, the hero we co-authored in undergrad. He thought we should call him Lake after my dream about the enchanted lake lasted us a spirited 2 months. We furnished Lake with a backstory. Lake started out as 2 men, strangers to one another until they witnessed the death of a close friend, a mutual friend. At the sight, their bodies magnetized toward each other, the ropes of their DNA braided. They flickered between their 2 bodies, now one, a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old both. We called them Younger Lake and Older Lake. He flashed between the 2 in the middle of fights and in the middle of hookups. We divided Lake's powers between the 2 halves. Younger Lake could force cells to divide and multiply, and Older Lake could force existing cells to degrade. To achieve the effect of opposites, we decided I'd speak for Younger Lake and he for Older Lake. It got so that we were calling each other by these names, and then we clipped the names into scraps of endearment. He became Old Man, he's a year older than me, and I became Baby Boy, which he began to say in Bulgarian, Bebe Momche. He said it tired him to speak so much in English, and he was happy to teach me the language so I could offer him a feeling of home. Edno, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, pet 5. He said he'd return home when he had fulfilled his dream, which was to be himself. Even though his mother had tolerated his queerness, she mourned that in Bulgaria he could not be openly himself. Or only a little bit he could. He was, like me, living a half-life, where he was not reviled enough to swear off his childhood, but not accepted enough to bring home a boyfriend. His father, the stepfather who raised him, told him his life would be very hard as a gay man. This father instructed him often to take down any social media posts that wore even the scent of queerness. He says he does this out of protection from me, Christian said, but I think he does this for himself. Toward the end of our 2 months of creativity, Christian began to tell me he was busy, that he'd finished his pages on his own, that his mother was calling him quite often to weep about the miles between them. I thought he had lost interest in me. I was thoroughly crushed. When I came home for the holidays, my parents did not allow me to wallow, or rather, they so fully subsumed me into their routine that I had no time to mourn. My father was organizing events to attract golfers for the off-season. My mother was still teaching, and when Christmas break came, taking me with her to shop and instructing me in the recipes she cooked every year for my father's Christian family. The 2 of us, my mother and I, were making knishes one afternoon, folding dough into clean ribbons. She liked these little religious rebellions against my father's family, when she asked if there was anyone special in my life. The air bloated with the smell of yeast. She did not look up from a fresh bowl of bread slurry. I shook my head, my forehead swamped. I hope you're being careful, she said, already well aware that I was gay without any idea what this looked like in practice, how often and easily men seek men and meet each other. I am, I told her. Good, she said, not so much as an acceptance but an order, I was to keep it that way. The men at the bar arrange a water for me. I take it. "You all right, man?" one of them asks. It's Crash, entirely sober, older, skinnier, and here as if brought by the magic of the punch I threw at Dozer. I have a tendency toward fiction, and in this unlikely scene with Crash, I am playing a prophet. I am playing a mutant or a sorcerer with the power to enact dreams. It's a way to explain Crash as the only man I recognize here at the club. Another, of course, is that when my father moved away, his best friends agreed to boycott the country club and kept their promise. Crash, unwanted troublemaker, no friend of my father, was under no such obligation. "Why don't we get you into a chair?" Crash says, nestling his shoulder under my armpit and helping me to a corner table, where he whispers without looking at me, "Saw your profile." He waits a moment for the information to wash over me, my Grindr profile, before grinning in my direction. Without much discussion, he tells the other guys he's getting me a ride. We find ourselves in the back of a truck with tinted windows. Are the windows treated to accommodate CarPlay? Does he escort guys back here often? He shimmies off my pants. The old carpeting tickles the back of my neck. So too do his fingers, which grip me, hard, clammily. He sucks my cock into his mouth without any discussion of who I am or what diseases I might be carrying. They could right now be riding the slip and slide of his expert tongue and his gulping throat, where they catch on a wall of healthy bacteria that might soon not be so healthy. They could sink into his stomach and then his bloodstream, or maybe he's gasping a mouthful of sperm-gathered diseases right onto my cock. How did Christian, the name Sipo sits at the front of my mouth, so un-Bulgarian, not even ending in ov or ova. How did he do this? I try to summon our first time together, speaking to Christian in that bed and teaching each other words. Forcing myself to the edges of language, I could feel my mouth, really feel it trying to shape and contain. I'm hard. I can come for Crash now, and I do. "My turn," Crash says, unbuckling his pants. "Wait, are you, clean?" "Showered this morning," he says. "No, I mean, well, you know what I mean. Didn't matter to you a minute ago." "I'm clean," I say, tested last week. Crash, what is his given name, frees himself from plaid golfer's pants, completely ready for me. His cock is thick and bent at a pleasing angle, the kind I can imagine easily and warmly moving against the roof of my mouth. "You're not trying to hide your status, are you?" I say. Crash grabs my hand and wraps it around his cock. "Just stroke if you're such a scaredy cat," he says. And I do. I'm both excited and coerced, perhaps a little excited to be dominated, to bear witness to the pleasures of such an overbearing force. It's hard to diagnose why we like anything we like. His cock twitches, and he ekes out a liquid like watered-down milk. It frosts my hand. "Do you have a napkin?" I ask. "This is why I like blowies," he says, zipping himself up. I follow suit, and then popping the trunk so I can climb out and scrub my hand against the short grass, looking over my shoulder, first at Crash returning to the bar, and then at any men who might notice what I'm disposing of. They won't, they can't, and yet I can feel dirtiness wriggling across every surface of my body, projecting out to everyone. How has Christian disposed of his? I decide to ask, standing at the entrance of the country club. I message him, texting him this time, "How did you conquer fear?" "I'm still trying," he says. "The club is mostly the same," I offer, even though this is not true. How could it be when, as a boy, my father walked me to a tall crepe myrtle he planted on the golf course the day of my birth and said he wanted me to sprinkle his ashes there? I was young, and when I was young, he had a poetical way of moving around me, an almost girlish openness. I think perhaps he took this rare opportunity afforded to us, thinking, young as I was, that I'd forget any unmanliness he displayed after I found my gender. Maybe it's because I never quite did that I can still remember how he'd rub a blade of grass between his fingers, how he'd perform the same softness on my hair when I wasn't feeling well. Scotland is the same too, Sipos writes. When he first arrived in Scotland, this was months after he'd distanced himself from me, he called me one night. Properly wasted, he admitted he'd retreated from me because he was afraid of long distance. Now he was more afraid of never talking to me again. He wanted to know if I wanted to be with him. I did. And then he wanted to know if we could still allow each other to mess around, well after I'd invested in him again. Actually, it's more accurate to say I never stopped. He said once, "You've kidnapped me," and I said, same as you did to me on that dance floor, and he said, we've kidnapped each other. Outside the club, I write, are you painting right now? I am trying, he answers. I want him to know that I miss him, that I don't know why we stopped seeing each other. We should move in together. We should have the life he left Bulgaria in search of. We leaned toward that life a few weeks ago when he stayed with my parents and me. I liked sharing a bed again. I remember nestling my nose against the space between his shoulders. He smelled like paper. We grew randy. My mother heard the commotion and mistook it for something palatable to her. What are you two doing in there, moving furniture? She said, after calling me into the hallway between our rooms. When I returned to bed, I told him, the man I'm to call Sipos, Christian Sipos, that I didn't know what we were doing. You are so scared, he told me. All the time you are. This is very tiring for me. Today, I punched a guy, I write to him now. I punched him square in the face. His face was a square, he asks. I'm saying my fist hit the middle of his face. His nose? How are you missing the point here? What point is that, he asks. I am not a coward. Ne strachlevitz, I write, straining for understanding. What do you mean, he says. Obichante, I say, my fingers curled around the foam. They grow eel-like as the screen flutters with the bubbles indicative of typing. I do not know why I couldn't say I love him in my own language. I do not know why I gloved the word. His answer, I love you too. Thank you. Now please welcome A.C. Clark to the stage to introduce our next reader.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Jason. It is my pleasure to introduce Lucas Martínez. Lucas Martínez is a writer and translator with experience in labor organizing and teaching. He was born in San Bernardino County and raised primarily in Claremont on ancestral Tongva land. He grew up speaking Spanish and English and considers both to be his native tongues. Martínez holds a BA from Lewis and Clark College and an MFA from the University of Virginia with a concentration in poetry. They have received the Battestin Fellowship from the Virginia Bibliographical Society to study Borges' manuscripts in UVA's Special Collections Library, and they have translated the work of Nicole Cecilia Delgado for a chapbook published by the Virginia Center for the Book. In Provincetown, he has been working on translations, as well as a manuscript of writing that includes collage, translation, essay, and poetry. But what I want to talk about tonight is the time he has spent not writing. Not writing has looked a lot of different ways to Lucas. In his own words, I've spent a lot of time in the print shop, playing ping pong, and talking to Ian about other things. Lucas can also be found in the Rezo room, printing zines about talking in the library, making bespoke, curated, and hand-bound pamphlets for their Winter Wednesdays class on poetic attunement, designing materials for United Campus workers, calling his beloveds, and cooking for a crowd. The truth is, this is all poetry. A dog walk on the beach becomes a dialogue about compassion and fathers. A bowl of pasta becomes an opportunity for us to reflect on our relationship to our belief and disbelief in institutions. When I told Lucas I was catching feelings for someone, they texted back, "Oh no." Through the beloved, the world is made. Perhaps needless to say, every time we have dinner, this guy reads us all a few poems for dessert. Their book in progress, Para recordar una manera de cantar, or to remind you a way to sing, demonstrates the hard-earned generosity and gravitas of a book born into the world through a person who is radically committed to being in the world and committed to a version of the world that is more possible than the one we're currently living in. In a letter to a comrade, the Salvadoran poet and revolutionary Roque Dalton wrote, and this is a translation, "I arrived at the revolution via poetry. You can arrive, if you so desire, if you feel the need. at poetry via the revolution. You therefore have an advantage. But remember, if you ever find any special reason to take pleasure in my company during the revolutionary struggle, to some extent, you'd also have to thank poetry. I thank poetry for Lucas Martínez, and I want us to all thank Luki for all of the poetry. So give it up for the boy we all love, Lucas Martínez.
Wow. Thank you, AC and Ian, for talking about other stuff. Okay. Yeah, this is gonna be fun. I want to start by thanking Jason for that beautiful reading. That was amazing. And I have a lot of good debt. There's a lot of bad debt that I have as well, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. I have a lot of good debt, and I'm indebted to certain writing tonight, I feel like, really intensely, like Heriberto Yepes and Don Miche, Juan Gelman, Cecilia Vicuña, Daniel Borzutsky. And I have a lot of debt tonight to the people who helped put this on at the Fine Arts Work Center, my parents, my sister, my partner, and a lot of dear friends. And I wanted to share some of that good debt with you all tonight. Okay, is this already out of order? Okay, never mind. I think it was Annie Dillard who talked about Provincetown being swollen with time, or the days in Provincetown being swollen with time, and that really resonates. And then the swelling, there's a lot of space and time to a lot of different things in. And so the first thing I'm going to be sharing are something between a poem and an essay and a translation, and it feels reflective of the swelling of this time. And I've settled on calling it Translation Acts, Translation Study. Translation Study. If you grow up in the US, most of the books in the so-called foreign language or world language section are mostly French and German books. The French books are always little white sparse things. Crouching, the Spanish and the Italian section are near the floor mixed together, probably Portuguese too. There is no Arabic section to speak of most of the time. Either there are no books in Chinese or Japanese or Korean, or the section is entirely in Chinese or Japanese or Korean. The concept of language which has no nation state has yet to make it to the American bookstore. If you allow yourself to see it, you will always see how the market fails to be a barometer for our lives. Go to the foreign section looking for yourself. You look for something that could be a mirror, because usually the mirrors are all covered in flags. You go to the foreign section looking for a language self, for a mirror that isn't covered in red, but covered in words. There you find a nice man who translated another nice man. They live and teach in universities in Boston. They've taken liberties that they weren't born around. Borges, inescapable. The original is unfaithful to the translation. Sure, but what I'm talking about is trust, not art. And these nice men have no way of knowing how to earn trust. I have no way of trusting their liberties. I buy the book, I check it out, or I read it for the side with Spanish on it. The half of the book, that side of the spread in the bilingual edition, is normally the only side left in print in Spanish. I've started here, but I don't know how to start. I want to write about translation, about the ways and places translation occurs around literature, but not within it. Translation not in the bounds of professionalism. Translations made by people who are not translators. I say this not to diminish those who translate or translators, but to say that there are those who translate and there are translators. Those of us who read looking for something else, for some unnameable reflection within a book or a video or a song. Those of us who are charged with a language called foreign. Those of us who have no choice but to deal with the structure of the original and the translation, of inside and outside, of what is seen across. We don't all deal the same way, and that's fine, that's life. I saw myself in those back corners of the bookstore. I'm looking for where that led me to. Translation study. One of the cruelest acts of translation I have encountered is the dirty war. Its violence alters me regularly. You get taught about the militaries of smaller countries. This translation is a failure of the original as much as it is a failure of the translator. In Argentina, it's a failure. Ernesto Sabato failed us with what is called the two demons theory, that there were two sides of equal force, a population stuck in the middle, rather than a Christian nationalist military state project, terrorizing its people, backed and trained by the largest military in the world. But in the context of North American financing and intervention through the CIA and Congress, in the mouths of the American translators, this translation is also the fruit of a particular North American labor. Translators are public readers, and translation is public reading. You've left your panties out on the clothesline for the world to see. Our translations are not neutral, and this isn't a bad thing. Juan Gelman, el verdadero tema de la poesía es la poesía y por eso puede hablar de cualquier cosa. Argentina is a state of crisis. This crisis is the state as well. Heriberto Yepes, poetry is the crisis. America is the crisis. But knowing this, we must know what it means to translate into the crisis. Who calls what a war and why? Feel the word in your mouth roar, a world, a word, a world, a door, a war, a war, a war. Translation Act. We don't consent to every part of the world, to being a part of it, and thus I say we. Translation study. Another cruel one, the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Oh, how conflict rolls off the tongue in English. Picture two children who refuse to stop fighting, then look at pictures of a genocide in Gaza. How even in its illumination, all of this is still a flattening. How you will need your own words as well. How there is no formula I could ever offer for recovery within these words. Translation, like language, is a tool. Like many tools, translation is a weapon at times. While weapons inadvertently fire at times, weapons often fire on purpose. You could kill me with a wrench if you really wanted to. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. This translation obscures intifada and genocide. It obscures arms deals and Israeli bombs, a whole culture based around supporting apartheid and settler colonial occupation, a system of policing, a sense of proportion, a reckoning of time. And while I was worried about the wrench, an Israeli plane will drop a bomb, this won't make the news. Translation is a way of being, a mode. Translation is a life I've lived within the heart of empire. My translations, I hope that word disturbs the making of living. Of this translation, seek to honor the original. This is not brave. It is my job that the work of those who take action does not go unnoticed, does not get twisted, does not get met with a simultaneous, does get met with a simultaneous push from the inside. Translation study. Let's stop calling ourselves American. Translation Act. Yo crecí escribiendo los acentos en el teclado usando opción más E. Cada tilde que lees acá se escribió así. Translation Act. Para José San Cristóbal y sus películas. It was in José's film that I learned chicharra and cicada are the same word. I always thought I'd never heard a cicada before. I remember them for what I thought was the first time. I was in Nashville in August. A whole forest of green was pitch dark. The only ounce of color was the conjugating of the cicadas. Where is my original now? Where is my referent in the incomplete, knowing the original is hiding? Suddenly the sounds of the pampa sounds. Suddenly the sounds of late summer seeping into the edge. Translation Act. How simply does the window of the most light in this language become that of the least light in my other. On the second night of the solstice, I learned there are 3 nights of solstice. I learned about the strawberry moon when my friend 3 hours ahead, the man I love with, and the one I live with and the woman I love, told me to look at the moon, and I've waited. In my room with the door closed, I remembered I don't have a country. I have no evidence of what I keep. Nostalgia. Would I be one of the disappeared, tortured and released, born in a prison? Would I be torturer or military man? Gorilla and order? Car bomb or baton? Mother protesting in the plaza or journalist shot in the street? Would I have gone to Catholic or public school? Which is easier to unlearn, a Christian God or a fascist logic? Which is easier to forget, how many disappeared? That it matters who paid and who paid the price? Or that the only way I fit into this story, a river still soaking, isn't in time past, it's now. In my room with the door closed, I remembered I don't have a country. A patientless country. Night after night, I make a bed I can't sleep in and sleep in it. Night after night, I count words that don't mean anything and can stop leaving them. Night after night, a world left behind that keeps you in it. Word, I can't speak of it. Pants that I'm sleeping in. A thing left for the week of it. What the songs taught me, Hola America, for Josh and the solidarity I've been shown. In Chile, I was beautiful. I marched in the streets, cried and sneezed in the streets. I was less scared about being caught by the pigs than I was losing the Socialist Party flags they had handed out before the march. I was covered in snot and beautiful, and the Hyundai dealership burned, and we walked across Santiago and wondered what a bagel shop might do for the city, or an accessible subway, or a clean ocean. Ars Poetica. Poem where my sister calls me and tells me she just watched her classmate get tackled by a cop. Poem where her classmate was taking down a pro-Israel poster and starts getting pushed around by those putting up posters. Poem where were adults and her classmate was a kid. Poem where they had just gotten out of class. Poem where my sister says, "Oh God, I didn't want to cry." Poem where some cop runs over and tackles my sister's classmate. Poem where they are screaming into his ear as they cuff him. Where some woman walking by and says, "Go back to your country." Poem where I start to cry over the phone. Poem where the other students couldn't get the cop off this kid. Poem where they shoved the girl who went up to the cop who was asking why they tackled, why they weren't arresting the white adults who were screaming at this child. Poem, they picked him up like a rag doll, Lukey. Poem, they threw him on the ground. Poem where there is nothing to say. Poem where my sister finds the words. This is where they make the dictators. This is this country. Poem where we are on occupied land. Poem where the cop is doing his job. Poem where there is nothing to say. Poem where there is nothing to say. Translation study, translation act. The difficulty is not always in the translation. The trouble of translation is not always because of the translation. What the translation does is raise the difficulty of the original. What the translation does is raise the multiplicity of reading to light. Borges, inevitable, the original fails the translation. Translation is embodying the sometimes contradiction of the original, the myth of the original, its stability, its fixed place on the page, its codification. Reading enacts movement and transgresses the symbolic. Translation is the theater of reading's kaleidoscopic my, I, and language. El árbol, by Juan Gelman. De la violenta madrugada, un hombre entra a su casa y el olor de sus hijos le golpea la cara. Los olvidos, la furia, ahora cierra la puerta con doble llave y se saca la gente, la ropa con cuidado, apaga los gritos de la camisa o los ojos de la camarada que brillan en la cárcel y oye cómo se mueve la ternura en la pieza. Bajo sus ramas dormirá todavía una noche. Bajo sus ramas ya será cuando caiga. The tree. From the violent dawn, a man enters his house, and the smell of his children hits him in the face. Things neglected, fury. Now he closes the door with a double lock and takes off the people, carefully his clothes, turns off the screams of the dress shirt or the eyes of the comrade that shine from the prison, and hears how tenderness moves in the room. Under its branches, a night will sleep still. Under its branches, it will be laid when it falls. Within the slippages to get lost. Where does the tree stop and tenderness begin? If the man is sleeping, if the man is dead, the trees have many names. Dwelling upon dwelling from the prison, to the home, to the tree. Who takes up rest? Where does rest end? Who sleeps the night? This poem creates the possibility for tenderness and the man to be doing these things. The poem is open to the multiple derivatives of shelter and kinship to be. And the translation, for those who read across the page, at its moment of breakage, speaks to the poem directly. I'm going to read some collages, and it's pretty fun to collage. You allow a lot of things in, and it's great. And that's all I'm going to say. It's weird to read these because they really exist on the page. So it's going to be a little fun. Knows cómo traspasarte, X, none, and talked, las gotas, a few in el desierto, some languages, picked me up. Take me. ¿Dónde? Grammar asks the Mojave Desert, be more concrete, explain the truth by a certain just so. Sometimes grammar, but around it, in the low thicket. Saying is of trees, sounds a thing, feels in it, to lie, so, yo, si yo, that, buscando entre mis libros. The phone asks Smog to speak to us. Why so much first person? A convenience store de amarte como pocos. Hoy por la tarde anduvo, the peak at the valley. And with many, oh, how place, past place, our recent page held. Y, guitar, las ranas, we. Entre algunas cosas, arboleda, seremos una canción. Seremos una canción. All right, I'm gonna end with a thank you and with 2 more poems. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Gracias totales. David Byrne is dancing with a lamp. Oh, David, are you dancing with a lamp again? Is it springtime already? Spring is always trying to start early, though with varying success or approval, like Frank Zappa and the gentle roar of the San Bernardino freeway. Things fall into the background. And just as an orange peel sheds like it was never attached sometimes, you never expect winter to come off so easy, but it does. Anyway, on peels, what does it mean that we can only call some things after or for their removal? That some things form from what they've left. Let's recycle the gift wrap this time, or better yet, save it for another gift. I'll stitch together Mediterraneans and humid subtropicals and humid continentals of varying hemispheres, of varying attachments, of milder days. You do what you know. I want to be stuck to the sun all the time. I want my arms wrapped around it. Accompanied milonga. Milonga, I'm translating now. Do you still hear this? Sift through sound and find a signal coming from the north. Retrieved voice. How do I mean anything in this land? To sing a milonga is to doubt your ability to speak alone, to see yourself within and seeing from that place to reaffirm life. Mi vida, where do songs go? My symbols are symptoms of a body singing to remember who hid behind war and who went missing trying to save us. Milonga, you doubled me in a form and began singing to those who have made me. Your sights on what there is left to do until we are all free. I received the self in songs. Mis orejas have learned how to hear this gift. Doves raised by my great uncle. Signifiers emptied of signs. A sound and its echo. Rehearsing the past for what is to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason and Lucas, for those readings. That was superb. Just a couple of announcements, and I'll let you go. Our next fellow showcase will take place in a couple of weeks on Friday, March 21st, same time, featuring art exhibitions by visual fellows Daniel Levine and Jose de San Cristobal, and readings by poetry fellow Kai Conradi and fiction fellow Clara Mallon. But before again I let you go, Jason, Lucas, Cherry, Ed, please stand. Let's give you guys a last round of applause. That was superb. Thank you all for coming and have a good evening.